Do you remember December 2nd, 2015? It was a Wednesday when a heavily armed man and woman terrorized the city, killing at least 14 people and wounding at least 17 at a social service center before leading the police on a manhunt, culminating in a shootout that left the suspects dead. Panic, chaos, and rumor gripped this largely working-class community about 60 miles east of Los Angeles as the attackers carried out the nation's worst mass shooting since the attack on the elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut nearly 3 years prior. Chief Gerard Bergeron of the San Bernardino Police Department identified the two suspects as Saeed Farouk and Tashfeen Malik. Farouk was born here in the United States. He shared a 6-month-old daughter with Malik. Farouk was an environmental inspector, had been employed with the county health department for at least 5 years. But on that Wednesday morning, he attended a holiday party for the department at the Inland Regional Center, a sprawling facility that provides services for thousands of people with disabilities. He left angrily after a dispute of some sort, and he returned with his wife around 11 a.m., heavily armed. The chief said there had to be some degree of planning that went into this. I don't think that people just go home and put on tactical clothing and come out and commit a mass shooting. He said that a motive has not yet been determined, but they're definitely not ruling out terrorism. The couple was armed with 223 assault rifles and semi-automatic handguns. While shots rang out, others in the building crouched and hid, sending text messages. The chief said that most of the victims were found in one part of that building, but it took hours to render the scene safe. The attackers left explosive devices behind, and authorities were only starting to process the scene and could not identify any of the victims late Wednesday. As the suspects fled the scene in a black sport utility vehicle, large parts of the city were paralyzed throughout the day. Residents were told to remain indoors, and government buildings, stores, offices, and at least one school were either closed or put on lockdown. Yellow school buses filled with survivors of the shooting were escorted by police vans to meet anxious relatives at a church. Late in the afternoon, dozens of heavily armed police officers in tactical gear descended on the residential neighborhood in the pursuit of the attackers. Witnesses described the wild scene as dozens of officers closed in on the vehicle with hundreds of shots fired as the people in the vehicle battled back with the police. The chief said there were at least 20 officers involved in the gun battle. The chief also said a third person fled the scene and was taken into custody, but the police did not yet know his involvement. A police officer was wounded in the shootout and was being treated at the hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. In a year repeatedly marked by such massacres, San Bernardino joined a tragic roster that included Charleston, South Carolina, Roseburg, Oregon, and Colorado Springs, where just 5 days earlier a gunman killed 3 people and wounded 9 at a Planned Parenthood clinic. Investigators were puzzling over the motives, and there were conflicting accounts of what led to the shooting. Assistant Director David Bowditch of the FBI's office in Los Angeles would not rule out terrorism, stating, "We will go wherever the evidence takes us. We are definitely making some movements that is a possibility." One senior American official said that Mr. Farouk had not been the target of any active terrorism investigation, and he was not someone that the Bureau had been concerned about before Wednesday's shooting. Other officials of the FBI was looking into a possible concern between Mr. Farouk and at least one person who was investigated for terrorism a few years ago. Earlier in the evening, law enforcement officers knocked door to door of the small townhouse in the nearby city of Redlands that they believed to be associated with Mr. Farouk. They also secured Mr. Farouk's office. President Obama at the time once again called for better background checks and new restrictions on access to guns for people who might pose a danger. "We should come together in bipartisan basis at every level of government, make these rare as opposed to normal," he said in a previous scheduled interview with CBS News. He added, "The one thing we do know that We have a pattern now of mass shootings in this country that has no parallel anywhere else in this world, and there's some steps we could take not to eliminate every one of these mass shootings, but to improve the odds that they don't happen as frequently. California has the strictest gun laws in the nation. According to the most recent report card by the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, it is among a handful of states that ban sale or possession of many assault weapons, including the most common models, although people who owned those firearms before they were banned are allowed to keep them. But it was not known where or how the suspects obtained their weapons. The attackers drove up in a dark SUV to a complex of buildings run behind an inland regional center. They spent several minutes shooting inside one of the buildings and then fled. They were dressed and equipped in a way that indicates they were prepared to do what they came to do. For hundreds of people who worked in the Inland Regional Center or who were clients of its services, a quiet morning turned into a scene of utter panic and bloodshed as people fled or hid behind locked doors or under desks, communicating with their families and friends through panicked phone calls or text messages. Jamil Navarro, who worked with special needs children at the center, called her mother Olivia, saying that there were gunmen in the building. Olivia Navarro said that they turned off the lights as she was whispering because she didn't want the gunmen to hear her speaking. Her mother told her to stop talking and she would be right there. Why would somebody want to hurt somebody who helps children? San Bernardino is a city of more than 200,000 people that has struggled in recent years as the city filed for bankruptcy. Residents suffered a high rate of home foreclosures, and the commercial downtown area deteriorated. The population has swelled over the past generation with migrants from Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, drawn by proximity to Los Angeles and housing that is affordable. After the shooting, teams of officers searched the buildings room by room for survivors or suspects, and the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives also detached agents.